How important is this part of the schedule for Brian Kelly and his staff to bring prospects onto campus, be able to not only evaluate them on their practice facility, at their practice facility, but begin to either maintain the relationships that they either started back in the spring or start to develop relationships with future recruits? How important is this part of the schedule for Kelly and his staff?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, one of the more fascinating stretches of this whole era so far. And yeah, obviously I don't want to place too much importance. I don't think if they don't hit it out of the park, it's DEFCON 1 or anything. But this is our first real chance to see, just what this staff is like in a major pressure recruiting zone and having all these major guys on campus. And it's guys that you've actually had several months of time with. So it's not just, that chaotic December, January they had to deal with that I wasn't going to judge them by. This is, hey, you got all these guys on campus. These are your guys, and can you get them? Because it's fascinating because it's kind of the the situation that Ogeron found himself in a lot, where it was like, man, LSU is linked with all of these massive 5-star defensive linemen and these huge name quarterbacks from across the country. And you're like, wow, that's interesting. But then come February, and I know Ogeron had plenty of great classes, but still, a lot of times those guys that you weren't sure if they could get, they didn't end up getting. Those big, your Jordan Birches of the world or Caleb Williams is. And I'm just so interested to see if Kelly and his staff are able to win those battles. If they are able to win with a Jaden Rashad or a Dante Moore. If they are able to make up ground with, a Dante Wayne or a Nicole's Harbor, guys like that. I'm not going to drastically hold it against them if they don't, but it's just going to finally tell us a lot more about, hey, they have the relationships, they have the time with these guys, and they're on campus, which is a victory. Can you do something with it? I think we'll just find out a lot. I
thought Nick Saban came over and grabbed Danny Lewis just because he could last recruiting cycle to show Brian Kelly and send a message to the new coach. Hey, man, everything runs through Tuscaloosa, even if I want a player that you were desperately dancing for on social media. Derek Williams put out his top 8. He is at Danny Lewis's former school. I know that you cover more of the program and what's happening, and you lean on guys that cover recruiting, but you had a great piece on in-state Louisiana prospects a couple of weeks back, which is a great read over at The Athletic. And one of those guys that detailed in that piece is Derek Williams, the safety there. And it seems like this is going to be an Alabama fight to the end. He had his top 8 put out, and Alabama's there, and LSU is there. How important is it for and look, it is year in, year out, but specifically for Kelly here in his first recruiting cycle to win those types of wars for the high-end 5-star guys that everybody's coming in here trying to pluck?
Absolutely, yeah. You're absolutely right. That is the most important thing. And it's one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, in the way some national recruiting people talk is that, they're like, hey, LSU just gets kids from Louisiana. And maybe that was true at some point. And I don't think that's inherently true. And I think when people talk about hey, Kelly, likes LSU because it's recruiting, it's simpler. That's accurate. You can't deny that. It's exactly who your guys are. You know exactly who to focus on. That is true, but it is not easier. Alabama's harder than ever to beat in Louisiana. Billy Napier's relationships from his time at Louisiana makes it harder than ever to win around here. Jimbo has a ton of success here. I mean, it is not easy. So yeah, I think it's so easy to pinpoint being wow, load of the year in Louisiana means LSU's going to have a great class. But already it looks like the 2 5-star quarterbacks are most likely leaving the state, and Arch Manning and Eli Holstein. Tackett Curtis, for example, the great linebacker, he's the guy who Ohio State's the front runner with. Sheldon Sampson's not going to be easy. Derek Williams, to your point, that is a guy you're going to have to fight really hard with Alabama and others. And there's so many. I mean, of course, Osbury, It's just not as simple as people make it out to be. So if you have a really good year this year, I do think that could, roll into next year, and that can really create momentum and just be a statement, as corny as that can sound sometimes. Yeah. But on the other hand, if you miss on 4 or 5 of those top 150-ish Louisiana guys, then you actually can really have those conversations, those concerns about Brian Kelly. I think at that point, you are valid to ask.
Senator Rick Ward was in the studio yesterday updating some of the legislation that just got passed through last session that just finalized earlier this week. And obviously we talked a little bit about the NIL bill. Unanimously flew through both sides of the representatives and the Senate side, and should be no backlash of the governor signing that bill into law. Do you feel as if LSU is on a level playing ground with at least their competition from NIL language? And how do you believe that they are they are forming themselves behind the scenes to be competitive in this space.
Yeah, from a language law point of view, I think they have finally got themselves back in the right mix, and they should be, in a good situation to try to, get more aggressive, for lack of a better word, now. And I wouldn't say sit out, but kind of did have to limit themselves the first few months of this really getting rolling. They are still, I think they would even tell you, at a slight disadvantage in some ways, just for, several reasons. One, I don't think they want to get into those, 12 million a year class bidding wars that people are talking about. They don't want to get in your 8 million for Nico kind of deals and things like that. I genuinely think they are intentionally trying to avoid that. Two, as well as LSU just paid 20, 30 million between buyouts and new hires from basketball, football, baseball, all these things the last few years. I think a lot of the biggest boosters are kind of, the ones who just have the holy crap money are kind of like, yeah, I mean, I'm going to help, but I'm not going to just buy your roster every year, at least right now. So they do have some things they're working on. But what I think, and I have a piece coming out in the next, hopefully in the next few weeks, is I think LSU is working more toward a sustainable model. That's kind of their focus, a model that's more about, okay, here is what you are getting. And, it's straightforward, but it's real money. It's not proposed money that could get up to X, and it's kind of fake or fugazi. It's a little bit, just this is the number, and this is sustainable, and you are going to get it, and it's reliable. And I think that's the model they're trying to go for a little bit. But I'll have more on that in the coming weeks. But, yeah, I don't know if LSU's ever going to be in the A&M, or even what Florida seems like it's ramping up to do. I don't know if they're going to be there. They might, but it does seem like they have a plan to put themselves right back in that mix.
Jacob Flint's the new strength coach. He is in the hands, or he's got the football team in his hands for the next couple of weeks in getting them prepared for fall camp. And just your short research on the new staff, what have you learned about the strength staff and how they have been able to form relationships with the current group and getting them prepared?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, to some extent, that is Flint's superpower. I had a piece I want to say it was late December, kind of detailing that at Notre Dame, that was his greatest thing. I know they had other guys who, I'm so embarrassed I'm blanking on the name of their renowned head strength coach, but that guy is brilliant. But Flint became the guy who was just as good and qualified and got offers from plenty of Power 5 jobs. But his thing there was he was the expert at those relationships. He was the guy you go and talk to and pick your brain on when you're having issues. And I think even deeper than that, he works really well as that liaison between Kelly and players. Not as in players go to him with problems about Kelly, but it works both ways. He's the guy who helps them learn what he's like and what he wants, because he's been with him since literally he was a player at Central Michigan. But on the other hand, I think Kelly relies big time on Flint, which every head coach does with a strength coach. But he's the guy these past 6-7 months has been like, hey, what are you seeing? I think you can see several of the guys who left the program back in the winter. Those were guys that kind of, already were having issues with how Flint did things those first few weeks, for example. So I think Flint's done a really good job in kind of implementing how LSU is going. The rebuild of the culture, I guess, has been the buzzword, right? And the accountability stuff that we've heard over and over again, that is not fake. The accountability, system and all that has changed drastically. A lot of that is run directly through Flint and his program because they're getting the most time with them. So I think I'm not going to pretend to sit here and know, hey, I know exactly how the strength numbers are different than last year. No, sure. I don't know. But I do think that is Flint's, main strength so far.
Is there a position group or a personnel position or somebody in particular that you are looking at this summer that you are expecting to make a jump from conditioning, somebody that can maybe play themselves into on the field come fall because of the offseason they could have?
Quick caveat is it won't be play into something because we all think a lot of these guys, but I think receiver is an area that that LSU wants more out of conditioning wise and all that, and thinks there is a lot of room for growth. And those are obviously star players, at least five or six of them. So I think that is one that I'll watch, but it won't be as obvious to all of us. I think that's a great question. I think linebacker jumps out, not because it's they inherently needed it, but it's just a collection of more guys that, weren't, aside from Baskerville, none of these linebackers really were clear, obvious players last year. So I think, and I've just heard really good things about what Mike Jones is doing, and that's not new news to anybody, or Greg Penn growing into kind of a physical star. and some of these younger guys behind them. So I think linebacker would be one I'm just interested to see if they make that kind of leap with strength and conditioning and growing. And then defensive line is just the obvious one because they have these physical stars. And I think Flint's doing a good job of really molding them into how LSU wants to play. And there just seems to be an intentionality and things like that of kind of what you want this to be. And I think the defensive line could really take a leap.
Robert Steeples' name always comes up when we ask either players or coaches about people inside of that building that are making impacts every single day. What have you learned about Steeples? And he seems to be having very much a lot of success on the recruiting trail right now. And what do you know about him from a position coach? I know he's making the transition from high school to a big D1 job.
Yeah, it's funny that I just spent a lot of time talking about this with Flint, but I'm not lying. Like the thing with Steeples that you just hear from every coach in that program, from every player, it's relationships. That is just the word you hear every single time with him. And that is not fake. I mean, you hear him talk at the coaches clinic for a long time. This guy thinks in depth about players and how to connect with them and how to get more out of them and how to, channel them and all these things. He thinks so much about that. In his time as a high school coach, I think he would tell you most of that incredible turnaround at DeSmet, turning him into a national power, was really that part of things. So you talk to people now and they're like, Steeples, I don't know how good Steeples is a position coach so far. I haven't even heard, honestly, much at all about him as a football coach, more as much as others. But that part of it from around the roster, not just with cornerbacks, that is all I've heard, is how good he is at building these relationships. And the same goes for recruiting. It does seem like he is in the mix with a lot of guys, and the ones he's in with, they love him. They deeply care about him and want to keep that relationship, which, by the way, even if they don't get guys, that comes in handy when guys are back in the portal in a year or two. So, yeah, I think Steeples is a fascinating prospect because I have no idea if he's ready to be an SEC cornerbacks coach in a pure football point of view. I don't know. But he is a really fascinating character growing in the game that I do think is going big places in the next few years.
It seemed like the storyline last week around Brian Kelly is that his time on the job has been very effective up until this point. I think the national media has even started to take notice of, it feels like LSU might have the right guy when you hear him talking about around LSU football. Have you heard any return since Kelly has returned from Destin, or at least what is the feeling that you have gotten from some of your national writing friends that you may talk football with on the short time that Kelly has been in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, I think you put that pretty well. I think, what's the thing that you and I have been saying from the start, I think, is that, hey, to some extent, LSU is the sports car that has won titles with 3 coaches, but for the last 18 years has been run without, really exactly some amazing head coach. Hey, no comment. But yeah, so I think a lot of people are kind of, who spend time around the program, have come down to Baton Rouge for some of these interviews, who've spent in Destin, for example, are at least coming around to our line of thinking of, you have a guy who is one of the 2 or 3 process gurus in college football, a guy who really knows how to, from an organization standpoint, which sounds so boring, but that really is what the great coaches are, is the best at running an organization. I think people are catching on to that, and they are hearing the same things we are about how much accountability's changed, how much culture's changed, and all that. I think a lot of people still have the exact same questions about, is he going to land recruiting classes in the top 3 and 5 every year? Because that is somewhat the standard. That is a question people have. There are questions, not hard ones. No one's like really intense about this, but there are questions about, quarterback development, offensive stuff that I think people are just intrigued by, because I think it goes back to that number one question we've all had for months is like, did Kelly get Notre Dame to their ceiling and he was just making do with what they were able to get, or did he get them there and then to some extent hold them back? I think that's a question people have, not that I am insinuating that. So I think a lot of people want to see, like, how does a Brian Kelly offense look in the SEC against these defenses? I think that's the other thing. But to your question, I think there is an understanding that he is getting LSU back to being a well-run machine and a well-run sports car, I guess.
Shifting gears a little bit back to baseball, after your latest piece at The Athletic for covering LSU and the Southern Miss Regional, what was kind of your takeaway? I think you were at the Regional. What was your takeaway of the LSU baseball team, not only from the regional, but as a season in a whole? Because it kind of felt like a microcosm of the season.
It really did. Yeah, I think, and I know there are others who cover this team, day to day closer than I do. But, I've been around for 5 years now, and I think there was this weird disconnect between people who view this as LSU not getting to Omaha was this failure with, this opportunity, which, by the way, yeah, if you view it as they had leads against Southern Miss and they would have played Ole Miss. Yeah, you were right in that sense. But in like the actual preseason broad sense, I'd always view this as a team that had a limit. Like, hey, I knew this was going to be a great offense, but I just don't know many teams that have made Omaha in recent years, let alone from the SEC, without a single, marquee ace pitcher, or not even ace, but that guy you just trust on a Friday or Saturday. You could argue none of the three, or two would be weekend starters most years. So I just think, and I know the bullpen did some great things and figured things out, but I always felt like they were, playing like going uphill against things this year. So I view it as, this is a disappointment. They lost that game they could have won. Both those games they could have won. There are frustrations. But I don't think my opinion on Jay Johnson comes out of this much different. I think most of the things about Jay Johnson are his offensive ability. He's done that. He's an elite recruiter. That's the number one thing you hear. He has an elite pitching, pitching recruits coming in, 13 of them, probably 9 or 10 are expected to make it to campus. I do have confidence things are going to change. You talk to people in that program, there is an optimism that he knows what he's doing and he has a plan. The question that is fair to ask is the fielding issues, right? Because, there is data showing that even at Arizona for years, that has been a slight bugaboo, for him. I don't know. I won't pretend to be an expert there. I do think his history is also shown with those errors. He has proven he can get to Omaha anyway, so I don't know. But that is the one thing where it's like, I wonder if that is a coaching issue. I don't know. But the rest of it, I leave this year in pretty positive standing with how I think Jay Johnson's going to get LSU.
Incredible Fugazi drop today. It is great to see you, sir. Have a great rest of the week.
I appreciate that. Yes. Yeah, I really do. It means
absolutely.
a lot.
Fairy dust.
It was beautiful. From one Italian. Yes. Ciao. Have a great day.
I'm not Italian, but
I know you're
Jersey,
not.
so I just pretend I'm Italian.
You could play one in a movie for sure. We will see you soon, buddy.
That's all
we
you
will see
need, a
you
little
soon.
chain under there.
That's right. A little horse head for him.
I did wait in line. I don't know. I love a good Italian hoagie, so I don't know. When you grew up in Jersey, you just are around Italian things.
Have a great rest of the week, man. Good to talk to you.
Thanks as always, guys.
All right, man. There he is. Brody Miller checking in from the